Hi, and welcome to the show. Rate and review at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today's show, we have Yvonne Ator. She's a physician and a personal and executive coach for physicians. And her Kevin MD article, which we'll talk about today, is titled, What My 10-Year-Old is Teaching Me About Boundaries. Yvonne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. This has been a dream come true, just so you know. I'm a huge fan of
Well,
your
thank you
work.
so much for reading and coming on the show. Now, before getting to your article, just briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Yeah, I have an MD and an MPH. I was the quintessential idealist who immigrated to the US from Nigeria, born in the UK, England, and wanted to change medicine, change the world through medicine, and found myself burning out, which was a shock to me because, this is the American dream. You're supposed to live it. And I just was really shocked to see that the thing I'd sacrificed everything for was now I either had to choose living or doing it. And I chose to save myself. And so, through a series of events, including my dad actually dying during a physician strike, I chose to focus on physician well being. And I've been doing this for the past decade. I'm really interested in physicians who went into medicine to help people like I did and find themselves struggling with overwhelm, compassion fatigue, disillusionment, and burnout, and people who have sacrificed so much to make a difference and find themselves struggling. And so these are the people I feel really passionate about, mission driven, heart centered physicians. Yeah, because I feel like without those professionals in general in every field, we're in trouble. So that's a brief, very brief
So,
summary of my path.
So I talked to a lot of physician coaches on the show, but you've been doing this for a decade, which is a very long time
Yes.
in the physician coaching industry. So contrast the situation now compared to when you first started 10 years ago. Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse when it comes to physician burnout? What's the situation like compared to
Oh,
when you first started?
s- so when I first started, right, my dad had just died in Nigeria during a physician strike in 2011. And I was like, okay, I see something coming in
Mm.
America. I don't know what, but I could hear the rumblings of like burnout, but we didn't have language for it at the time. No one was talking about burnout. I was seeing something that I couldn't put my finger on. And so back then, there was no language. No one was talking about it. So I feel like I was just kind of like with this machete, kind of just trying
Yeah.
to find my way. I knew I wanted to transform the culture of medicine. I knew I wanted to be the support that I wish I had when I was struggling, but there was no one and there was nothing. So I was just kind of fumbling my way. And when I was having conversations with the powers that be in medicine, the administrators, the executives, people were looking at me like I was crazy. And there was just no interest in physician
Mm.
well being back then. Fast forward to now, it's been better and worse in some ways. Better in the sense that there's language for it now. People are really starting to, since the pandemic, the thing
Sure.
that
Like what's the
I
language that we're
was,
talking about other than physician
so,
burnout? What are some of the terms that you're hearing more frequently now?
so things like perfectionism, boundaries, shame in the workplace, bullying, things like, work-life balance, which is kind of like a misnomer, but because I think about more like work-life harmony or integration or homeostasis. And then things like being willing to invest. Now there's like a willingness. There's still somewhat of a reticence, but there's more of a willingness to talk about it. The shame is less, right? There are more avenues for having conversations, and there are obviously way more physician coaches, and there are more programs in the system to support physicians. But in terms of what I've seen that's worsened is that there's still more exploitation, still expecting physicians to do more with less, and just generally in healthcare. I think since the pandemic, I've definitely felt like the squeeze has been tighter. So even though there are more avenues for well-being, people are in survival mode and have no time to get out and do the work that they need to do to come back to themselves.
What's the typical profile, and there may not be one, but what's a typical profile of a physician who comes to you for coaching help? What kind of questions, what kind of issues are they dealing with?
So the physician who comes to me for help, maybe it's because of how I show up in the world, but the physician that comes to me for help is usually someone who is kind of was multi-passionate before they came to medicine. So very good at many things and have now like focused only on medicine and finding that they're completely exhausted all the time. There's this sense of hopelessness in a
Mm.
way where it's like no matter what I do, I just can't seem to get over this hump. I really that when by the time they come to me, they really need the help. but they also have the sense of wanting to return back to who they were
Hmm.
before they came into medicine, wanting to gather. They feel like they've orphaned different parts of themselves. Like maybe they played guitar before medicine,
Yeah.
maybe they volunteered or wanted to go into medicine to had the idea of doing mission trips or, or being more connected to their communities, right? As the family doctor or the physician in the community, and find themselves completely isolated, completely focused on work, and nothing else matters, nothing else exists except for work, and barely have time for their family. So by the time they come to me, they feel like they've orphaned all of these different parts of themselves, and they're wanting to come back into finding the person who went into medicine to begin with, right? Who was that? That's why I call my work the thriving idealist, right? Who was that person who wanted to change the world through medicine, and like where's that person gone, and wanting to bring that person back, reconnect with the reason why you came into medicine in the first place, and find a way to thrive personally and professionally while making that difference that you set off to make in the world. So that's usually the kind of profile, very heart centered but starting to feel really disconnected from the heart, very mission driven, wanted to make a difference, and sacrificed everything to make that difference, and find themselves going like, what am I doing? Where am I? Who am I?
So your KevinMD article is titled "What My 10-Year-Old Is Teaching Me About Boundaries," and I often hear
Yes.
the lack of boundaries leading to burnout. So tell me the event that led up to you. Why did you decide to write this?
So it's funny, I always wanted to write an article for Kevin MD, and I was sure it was going to be about physician strikes because, I felt like physician strikes were coming, and that's a topic for another day. But I noticed that the people I was serving, like everyone right now is really just wiped out
Yeah.
to the point of not being able to do anything. And I wanted to speak to what I was seeing in my house, which was that because my kids had heard me use this language, maybe they've heard me talk about boundaries, they've heard me speak to groups and all of that, that they were now starting to use it. And I realized that one of the reasons why we're in the trouble we are in medicine is that we've been trained to disregard our boundaries.
Mm.
We've been raised up, so to speak, to ignore our needs and our values and our wants or our necessities, right? But seeing how my kids were growing up in my home, they had the language to say, this is okay, this is not okay. This is acceptable,
Mm.
this is not acceptable. Hey, mom, I don't like the way you did this. Please, can you do that? They were using their words.
Yeah.
And as someone who, yes, I was born in the UK, but my family is Nigerian, like coming up from that immigrant family, you just didn't do it. You just didn't say things like that. What are you talking
Yeah. Yeah.
about?
Yeah.
Boundaries? What's that? I sacrificed everything to bring you to this country.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Right. And so it's like, so to have my kids feel safe enough and empowered enough to articulate, hey, this is not okay, or hey, I like this, please, more of this, please, right? And so, but as I've been coaching physicians, I realized that because of how we came up, where it's like, no, you just grin and bear it, it'll get better tomorrow, just hang in there until you finish med school, hang in there until you finish residency, hang in there until you finish, it'll get better when you become an attending. It just
Yeah.
you just keep hanging on and never really developing the language or the sense of, what are my values? What's
Yeah.
important to me? What do I stand for? And what's violating that? And how can I set parameters around these values, these things that I value, so that I can live in a way that's aligned for me? Because the only way we can live sustainably, right, is if we're in alignment with our values and if we have those boundaries intact. So that's how that article came about. It's like, wow, imagine if we retrained ourselves, if we, maybe we grew up one way, but you can and reparent yourself to learn these skills now so that you can use the words to express, no, I would like to a day off. I've been working for, 60
Yeah.
days straight,
Yeah.
and this is not okay, or this is not healthy.
Yeah. I think the people who get selected to go to medical school inherently, they rarely say no. They tend to be people pleasers. That's why they go into the profession in the first place. They want to help
Exactly.
the world. They want to make people feel better. So inherently, there is a character trait that wants them to always say yes. And sometimes that
Yes.
does negate a lot of the boundaries. So, what are some ways that physicians can reintroduce some of those boundaries? Because if you are completely boundaryless, that I think is a surefire way to get to burnout.
Yes. So I like to think about boundaries. I love the book Boundaries by Townsend and Cloud. And I like the visual that they have. I think I saw it there and I just kind of expanded on it. This idea of boundaries being a fence around your yard. So imagine a fence around your yard. Your house is you and all the things that you value. So think about your values, what's important to you, what do you stand for, what would you like, what are you creating in your life, or what kind of life would you like to live? Let that be like the house, right? And then the boundaries are the fence around the yard, and then you have a gate in that fence. Sometimes when people get scared of setting boundaries because they think it's just a wall,
Yeah.
no, it's like a fence with a gate. So when you have a fence, the fence keeps the things you don't want out and the things you want in, right? But then there's a gate that negotiates, right? If something's not working for you anymore, you can open the gate and let it out. And if you want other things like better relationships, then you can open the gate and allow those in. So this idea of what do I stand for? So number one, getting very clear about your boundaries. Or your values. This is the first thing I tell anyone. What are your values? What matters to you? If I ask you, what are your values? Can you rattle them off to me? Is it creativity? Is it service? Is it love? And if you stand for those things or those things are valuable to you, what gets in the way of you living those, right? Is it spending 500 hours on the EMR, right? What's getting in the way, right? And so how do we protect that? So that's where the boundaries come in. And I like the definition of boundaries as what's okay, what's not okay, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. So I'm certified in all of Brené Brown's works. And so Dare to Lead, Daring Way, and all of that. I really like the language in there. Right. And she says, what's okay, what's not okay, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. So if I want to live the value of service, what's okay for me to do? What's not okay for me to do? What will I allow around me? Right. And what will I not allow? Will I allow myself to serve until I am completely exhausted? Or will I put time limits around how much time I'm serving? Right. What's okay, what's not okay in terms of making time to create?
Sure.
Right. Am I able to make the time to create? Is it okay for me to go for months without creating something, right? And finding myself completely dry emotionally and spiritually? Or is it okay for me to make, once a week, maybe on a Saturday afternoon, I'll whip out the guitar and play. So being able to get clear about your values, then start to set the boundaries. And then the third concept I like to think about is the concept of living big, BIG. What boundaries do I need in place, B, so that I can live in integrity with my values, that's the I, while assuming that people are doing the best that they can and while I'm doing the best that I can. So if you're in a system where, okay, there's a system and there's schedules and, everything is determined ahead of time. Okay, so you know that the administrators or your supervisors are doing the best they can. What boundaries do I need in place so I can live with the fact that they're doing the best they can while also wanting to live my values? So being able to have the hard conversation, right? In order to live big, this idea of living big, living in alignment while assuming people are doing the best they can. Because if we don't assume people are doing the best they can or that we're doing the best we can, then there's no gate. Now everything's just a wall. My way or the highway, or I do what they want and I don't have any of my needs met, right? So being able to live big allows for the boundaries, the fence and the gate. What's important to me, but also I'm doing the best I can and they're doing the best they can. How can we negotiate this? What kinds of conversations do I need to have? But definitely being able to use your words. So that's one thing I really like about the boundaries, the idea that it's a living document, right?
Mm.
It's a living thing. And I think a lot of us are in survival mode and feel like we don't have the bandwidth to have the conversation. So that would be another thing I'll say. Take care of yourself, whether it's meditation, running, exercising, journaling, so that you have a little bit of margin, a little bit of space to sit down and go like what matters to me, articulate it, and then have the conversation and then put things in place. If you're in survival mode all the time and not able to take that time, then your life just flies by, and by the time you know it, you're 63 and wondering what happened to my life. What did I do here? This is not the life I wanted to live. And I've had a lot of people come to me in their 60s and say, I it just went by.
Yeah.
It just all flew by and I don't know what I did with my life. And that's something I wouldn't hope for anyone, wish on anyone.
So tell me a success story. Tell me a case study or a story where someone implemented some of the ideas that you just mentioned and that moved the needle in their professional life?
So there's one who was a director of a hospital nearby here in San Diego, remain nameless. And she was mother of a young kid and was also pregnant at the time and was working, of course, the 80-hour weeks and then directing different programs and was just burning the candle on all the ends.
Yeah.
It wasn't just both ends, it
Mhm.
was all the ends. And we sat down and created a plan. And I think at first, like she wasn't having any time. And at one point, she even had her baby and was still trying to answer all the calls and not wanting to take time off to even to even care for the baby. And so we were able to come up with a plan where she was able to take some time off, redelegate certain duties that she has as a director, and cut down her clinical hours. Not to say that you shouldn't work, but being able to create more margins so that you can show up for the things that you care about. Now, she really cared about physician well-being actually at her
Mhm.
hospital and but didn't have time to do that.
Sure.
And so she was able to cut out the things that were not in alignment with her values. There was some administrative work she was spending a lot of time on that she could care less about. She didn't care about the meetings, she didn't care about it. And so we're like, what why are you spending any time
Yeah.
there? So let's just look at your values. Her values were service and I think generosity and connection, really wanting to connect with the people she was working with, and also being wanting to connect with people at home as well. And so being able to look at your priorities, she was able to look at her priorities. At the time, her priorities were her relationship with herself, her relationship with her spouse, her relationship with her kids, and then her immediate family, and then her work community. Looking at those priorities and then applying those
Mm.
values to her life, she was able to see, okay, here I'm spending, I think at that point was like 60% or so on things that she didn't care anything about
Yeah.
because she was expected to. Just, I mean, and so once we discovered that those were things she didn't care about, she was able to cut them out and then redistribute her time to things that she cared about. So physician well-being, and then really spending more time. She wanted to spend more time with patients, and then being able to spend more time with her family and her kids, and then have the baby. But I'm really proud of her because one of the things I love about my work is that it's not, and you're not just affecting one person, you're affecting patients,
Yeah.
you're affecting families, you're affecting generations through the kids. And for me, that's really important. So I was really proud of her because it was a very scary thing to do. And a lot of times we feel like if we say no, the world will stop, or people will stop loving us, or people will alienate us or cut us out. Well, the people who really matter will understand because when we set boundaries, it's a way of telling people how to treat us. It's a way of telling people how to love us, even. If I want to
Sure.
bring that word into medicine, right? And so if we don't set boundaries, people don't know how to treat us. If I don't say, this is not okay, then people will think it's okay and just keep treating you that way.
Sure.
Most times we think, oh, they're just doing it on purpose. It's that most people don't wake up in the morning and say, hey, how can I make Kevin mad today?
We're talking
Right?
to Yvonne Ator. She is a physician and a personal and executive coach for physicians, and her KevinMD article is titled "What My 10-Year-Old is Teaching Me About Boundaries." Yvonne, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience?
Yes. So I wrote down a couple of things that I wanted to share. I'm going to put on my glasses. So the first thing I wanted to share was that no one's coming to save you. You have to save yourself. So if you're in a situation where your boundaries are being violated, it's up to you to set those boundaries, to speak up. So you have to save yourself by expressing those boundaries. The other thing that I really want to share is that you can't do this alone, right? No matter how much you wrap yourself, life is going to happen and it's going to hit. And sometimes it's going to hit really hard. Who do you have around you? Who are you allowing around you? Sometimes your boundaries require that you allow people who nurture you, who support you, who get you and what you're about and are aligned with your values, and having those people close and leaning on them for support, right? Everyone has blind spots. So if you feel isolated, which is another thing I see in our community, people are so lonely and isolated, and this is actually a really big problem. But you can't do this alone.
Mhm.
Reach out for support, reach out for a coach, cultivate a small square squad, which is just a group of people whose opinions really matter to you, who really care about you, who can be empathetic towards you, right? Without judging you. Have at least 2 to 3 people that you can have around you who can mirror back empathy towards you as you try to negotiate these boundaries, as you try to set them, or else it'll feel like you're alone and you're crazy, right? And so those two things I think are really important. And the third thing I think is really important to take away is train. Make room for what really matters and practice. So whether it's making time for your exercise or making time for your journaling, making time, make time to create
Mm.
the life you want. Make the time, or else you'll blink and your life will be gone. And so those are three takeaways that I mean, I could talk forever, obviously, but those are the three things that are really showing up for me as really important. Make the time for what really matters to you. Get clear about what really matters to you, and then set the boundaries to protect them, right? But also making sure that you take care of yourself so that you can have that time to communicate those boundaries. And again, support. No one can do this alone. You need to make sure you have a community of people, or at least a coach or a mentor or someone who supports you as an empathic partner as you do this.
Yvonne, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.